What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. And with the second season of Netflix's The Witcher TV show coming out soon, December 17th, I believe, I thought that now would be a great time to dive into what got me into the Witcher franchise as a whole, and that is, in my opinion, one of the best games of its decade, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. So on May 18th of 2015, CD Projekt Red released the third title in their series of The Witcher, with this one being The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Now, this game had received a lot of hype and attention, especially after some amazing early gameplay clips and trailers were out that really got my and a lot of other people's attention. However, the game did suffer from delays before launch, causing even more hype to build, but also some frustration from fans. But honestly, in 99% of situations, I much prefer for a company to delay a game and then release it in the proper state as a finished and polished game, instead of as a dumpster fire full of bugs that takes another 2 years of patches after release to even be playable. I'm looking at you, Cyberpunk. Anyway, the game was received with incredible praise, earning numerous awards from a variety of media outlets, as well as many more nominations for awards that ended up not quite winning. And the game has currently surpassed 50 million sales after getting a large bump in sales again when the Netflix series Season 1 came out. So, just what made The Witcher 3 so great? I mean, there were 2 other games in the series before this one, and they were and still are very good games for their time, but none of them ever had nearly the kind of success as The Wild Hunt did. So why this one? Well, part of that can be attributed to a rise in gamer culture in general and leading to more sales, and the recent bump given by the Netflix series also didn't hurt at all. But to me, the reason is much bigger than that. Actually, there's a multitude of reasons, but it really boils down to it was just an amazing game that in turn turned out record sales for CDPR, which really just goes to show that there really aren't any gimmicks when it comes to making a profitable game. Just make the absolute best game you can and profit will follow you. But I digress. You see, The Witcher 3 was my first introduction to the world of The Witcher, but it was certainly not the first game made about this series, which originally began as a book series. Being based on a book series can help you in a lot of ways, but it can also hurt you. I mean, it gives you a large amount of lore and existing story to work with, but it can also be hard to get outside of the shadow of the books and make it something that is a standalone title, something that it is what it is. Without the books, it's still really good. But CDPR did just that, with the games being immensely more popular than even the book series. This actually led to a lawsuit between the author of the book series and CDPR, where the author claimed to be owed much more money now than he was originally given since the series was so popular. He never really lost that suit because at the time he agreed to a small one-time payment from CD Projekt Red because he somewhat famously hated video games. He thought that they didn't have the ability to tell a good story, and because of his lack of faith in the gaming industry as a whole, he really undervalued what the Witcher franchise would be worth, and he only has himself to blame for that. Because what I think is the most impressive part of this game is its storytelling and world building. Again, I knew nothing about this series going into this game, and yet I was almost instantly sucked into this world and interested in all of these characters. This game nails all of the important aspects of building a world, and it does it all without needing me to know what happened in the first 2 games, because it is so welcoming to new players, while also still having callbacks to many old characters and friends and old Easter eggs and stuff from the past that reward older players for playing the game as well, which is a really interesting and successful thing that a lot of companies, I feel like, struggle with. They either make it to where you have to have played the old games, or it's completely unconnected. So even if you did play the old ones, you don't get anything extra out of playing this. So I think they did a great job here in The Witcher of both rewarding older players who had played the other games and keeping it super welcoming to newer players to build their audience. It has a nearly endless supply of super interesting and genuinely real-life feeling characters who aren't just good because I'm a good guy or bad because I'm bad guy. They're actually shades of gray, and they have reasonable, understandable motivations, and their interests determine their decisions and actions. From like romantic interests of Geralt like Triss and Yennefer to characters like Dijkstra and Dandelion, there are so many great characters that you actually interact with, and it's honestly hard to think of a bad one. I mean, Triss and Yennefer both have their own unique backstories, and you have this history with them that you sort of learn about as you go on, or you experienced it if you played the other games. You also have a history with Dijkstra, and he has his own little quirks and things like that. He's a super interesting character to me. And then there's Dandelion, who's sort of the comic relief, but he also does sort of grow some as a character. And you get to see so many of these great characters. That's literally just a small tip of the iceberg of all of the immense just number of outstanding characters that are in this series. They all carry such intrigue and garner so much interest from me that it's honestly amazing how invested I feel in each and every one of them, and I don't even really know how they pulled this off that successfully. I mean, for example, Geralt. Despite being a gruff and tough monster slayer, supposedly devoid of all humanity and emotions, he can be surprisingly impactful as a medium to play out this story. And I think it's because of Geralt's position in the world that the player gets such an interesting and mostly unbiased viewpoint of the surrounding world. Because Geralt is supposed to only be invested in earning profits and killing monsters. But what we get to see from him is that he's so much more than that. He maintains several serious romantic relationships, unless you make decisions that cause him not to, but then that's you making those choices. Not to mention he also holds other very legitimate friendships for years. He has old rivalries and old people who he has grudges with. And there's a real human dynamic there that I think is interesting to experience in a character that's supposed to be so inhuman, but because the person playing as him is human, you still get to experience those things. It's just this super interesting little dichotomy to me. But anyway, Geralt as a character seems to genuinely care about a lot of the people he interacts with, and he definitely has sort of a softer, more emotionally connected side of his personality that you can either choose to lean into as the character playing him, or you can sort of try to ignore and go more to the Witcher, like, emotionally dead type of character. But at the same time, there is still a certain harsh, cut-and-dry brutality to him that makes him who he is no matter what you do. I mean, to me, though, this is a reflection of the entire world of The Witcher. It's a tough world. It's full of monsters, religious persecution, bandits, greedy empires, hell-bent on war, poverty, etc. Yet at the same time, there are softer aspects in the world of some genuinely good people just trying to make a living or support a family that are just caught up in this wider and larger world full of evil. And to me, that is perfectly reflected in Geralt's character. To me, it's part of why he's such a great avenue for us to see this world, because he represents so much of the world in a more symbolic way. Because he sees, we see persecution of mages firsthand through his eyes, while we also experience what it's like for him to be persecuted as a social pariah and an outcast. But we also experience quests with honest people who see us as humans and not just these emotionless Witcher monsters. And, that's an interesting thing, and it sort of lets us see the world through a multitude of lenses that you wouldn't get to see with a normal character. But Geralt, because of the unique position he's in as a Witcher, you get to see all sides of the coin. I mean, we get to interact with the lowest of the low in society, the poverty-stricken poor towns and the super poor beggars in the big cities, while simultaneously being thrust into these situations of political intrigue with the court affairs of the rich and the powerful at Nilfgaard, and these high-flying members of society that Geralt also gets to sort of associate with. So he gets both ends of it, and because we play as him, we do too. And I think that does an outstanding job in showing us all sides of this world. I could go on at length about the interesting and more deep symbolic things that I find in the world and in Geralt and the story of The Witcher as a whole, but that would probably bore you all to absolutely no end, so I'll end the segment by saying this. While I find all of these interesting themes and ideas in the game that also relate very well to real life, this interesting dichotomy of rich and poor and evil and good and things like that, it's fine if other people playing the game don't. I mean, that's okay. That's totally okay, because the game hides it so well. None of it's forced onto you. You don't feel like you're getting beat over the head with this symbolism and these overall themes and ideas about society and the real world. If you just want to go into a game and cut monsters apart and ignore the more subtle intrigue at work, then you absolutely can. And you'll honestly have just as much fun of an experience as the more nerdy players like me will. And to me, that is another hallmark of an outstandingly made game and world. Now, for more solid gameplay reasons of why the game is so great. And to me, I just cannot get over how addicting Gwent is. Honestly, I find Gwent to be the greatest minigame I've ever played inside of another full game. I've devoted hours and hours just to perfecting my Gwent decks, collecting all the cards, and the game does an outstanding job of introducing this as a fun and optional thing to do. It won't hurt you if you never even touch it, but it also rewards you with more unique and rare cards that can only be acquired at certain times in the story. So if you really invest in Gwent early on throughout the story, you get to experience these more unique and rare cards that even if at the end of the game you're like, you know what, let me try out Gwent, you've missed a lot of the opportunities you would have had throughout the story at this point. So it rewards players for that, but it also doesn't really punish you if you don't, because it's not vital to the game. Although, in my opinion, you should absolutely play Gwent all the way through, do everything you can with it. It is so much fun for me. Like I said, I personally had endless fun with Gwent, and I loved the professional tournament quest you get to take part in, exclusively because of my love of Gwent. I didn't really care about all the other things happening in that quest. I'm not going to spoil all of it, but there's a lot of other things happening in that quest more than just a Gwent tournament. I was there just for the Gwent tournament. I loved it. And I know a lot of people will just pass right over this part of the game, but it's an absolute gem. And in my opinion, if you ignore it, then you're absolutely missing out on potentially the best minigame in video game history. And yeah, I said it. It's arguably the best of all time. It is that good to me. On top of Gwent, though, you have the actual gameplay and combat. And let me say, this is some stellar RPG combat. While it might not be the absolute best combat you're ever going to find in any sort of game, it is certainly well above average, and in my opinion, it's even great. It relies on a relatively simple system of dodges, rolls, parries, light and heavy attacks, with some bombs, crossbows, and magic mixed in. That makes it a somewhat easy experience for inexperienced gamers to get into, but it also, at its high ends, provides a really challenging gameplay to more experienced side of players, especially on higher difficulties. The combat system can occasionally be exploited with some of the monsters' AI and stuff, but that's pretty rare, honestly. I mean, for the most part, it runs seamlessly, and it allows for character specialization. If you want to be a heavily armored, power-hitting beast, then you can be, but if you want to wear light armor and defeat your enemies with speed and more light attacks and, more of an elegant fighting style, then you can do that too, and there's a lot more depth than even that. I mean, you can be a magic character and develop, different, because there are different signs in the games, which signs are just spells if you don't know. But anyway, there are different signs in the game, and you can level up each individual sign, like Igni, which is a fire spell, or Ard, which is an air blast, or even a protective shield that they call Quinn, that if you level it up to a certain point, you can hold it, and if you get hit while your shield's up, it regenerates your health, and they have a mind control thing in the game. There's so much depth even in just the magic system, in addition to the normal combat system. And that's not even touching on the crafting side of things with alchemy, where you can make potions that enhance your skills while also coming at a cost. And there's so much that you can do, but also if you choose to not delve that deep into it, you can still enjoy the game and play through it with no issue. It's just there if you want it, and I think it's absolutely amazing. And all of this leads to interesting combat, but it also allows for a lot of replayability. I mean, there is so much replayability when you actually decide that you want to delve into all of the little aspects of the game. And, to me, replayability is what makes, like, open world RPG type games really good. It's super crucial to me. Because without replayability, then, you're paying all this money for this big open world game, and you play it once and you're done. To me, if you only play it once and you can't go back and play it again and enjoy it, it's not a great game. But with this, that is not an issue at all. I've played through it probably 10 times all the way through, and I've had a bunch of fun every time. It's a great game. I might play through it again after making this video, honestly, because I'm getting excited about it just talking about it. But I'm not done yet. The bestiary is another huge part of why the combat in the game is so great. Each enemy has different strengths and weaknesses to different signs and different oils that you can rub onto your swords. They also have different attack patterns and combat AI that makes each fight feel really unique and different from the ones that you had before it, which adds even more depth to combat. This is only enhanced when fighting what are essentially boss fights on these Witcher contracts that you get to go on which usually they take an existing monster in the lore and they add sort of a twist to them. Maybe they're I don't know. You'll have to play the game to see some of the twists they have because they are really unique and interesting. But they add these unique twists to them that create almost these little mini bosses, and some of them are much more difficult and larger than others. But it creates this interesting, almost like a boss fight system, but it's a side aspect of the game. It's not crucial to the story. It's just to immerse you in the world of what it would be like to be a Witcher who gets all of his money from slaying monsters. These monsters a lot of times even get large backstories for each one, and that makes it a much less mindless experience in combat. It's not just like, yep, go here, chop this thing up, move on. There's actually like a reason why they are the way they are, or there's strategy you have to employ and things like that. And to me, that is something that I really enjoy. These contracts, you get different ways of approaching situations. Some of them, all you can do is kill the monster. There's different ways to do that, obviously. But other ones, you don't even have to kill the monster. You can like break a curse that's on it, or drive the monster away, etc. There's a lot of other things that you can do other than just killing them in a lot of these situations. To me, that adds even more depth to every encounter because you're not just this heartless beast killing everything. You can also do, like, if it's a young girl who's been cursed in some way, you can break the curse and save her. Or you can be this heartless beast and just kill her. It's totally up to you. And I think that's super interesting. I really enjoy that. And then this is amplified even more by the fact that your actions carry serious consequences quite often in this game. Entire characters will die off or receive different fates in the endgame. You'll get more subtle changes in the environment or in a town as a whole sometimes. Sometimes you'll just get some commentary from the townsfolk as you walk by. And it's just this really, really cool system of making you feel like your actions carry weight and are important, which leads me into my next point about this game, the amazing quest lines. So the Bloody Baron quest to me is a great example of all the things that this game absolutely nails. So not only is the Baron an initially despicable person whose men run rampant raping and pillaging the land, but it soon comes to light that he's also a drunk who would beat his wife and was overall kind of a shitty guy. But as you advance through his pretty long quest line, you start to learn a little more about him, and you start to see a different side of him that's sort of hidden under this harsh exterior that you initially come across. Now, whether or not that makes you feel bad or sympathetic for him is up to you, but regardless, you do get to see him show some regret and remorse for his actions, and he starts to look like a genuinely changed man. And, you get the feeling that he's just a really sad guy at this point in his life. His daughter's run away. When he had to bury one of his other kids, as soon as they were born, they were stillborn. His wife has run off. And, he's just kind of this shallow husk of a man at this point. And, again, you don't have to forgive him, and I think he realizes that as a character. I think he sort of realizes that a lot of things he's done, he may not be able to be forgiven for, but he's going to give it his all to try to win his wife and his daughter back. And so your actions will directly impact his fate, but the fate of his wife and his daughters too throughout the story. And I'm not going to spoil all the outcomes for you in case you haven't played through this game yet, which if you haven't, I don't know what's wrong with you, all right? Go buy it now, right now. Click off the video, go play it, come back here once you're done with it, and then like the video for introducing you to such a great game. But anyway, some endings for the Baron are definitely happier than others, is what I'll say. And that's up to your control and decision-making throughout the game. And I'm pretty sure he also, he's useful for things later on in the game if you handle his quests in certain ways, versus if you handle in other ways, he won't be around to help you. And so, I don't know, to me, this quest does a lot of great things as far as your decision-making, but then it shows off more of the detective side of being a Witcher, where you have to use your Witcher senses to figure out what happened and analyze the situation and draw conclusions from it, and then you have to track people down, and there's a lot of really interesting things in that. And it also leads into a lot of heavy combat in a variety of different situations, and it puts you in a position as a sort of a bystander to all of these actions that happened before you met the Baron to make decisions that then impact the fate of the characters long after in the game. And you actually start to care about a lot of them in some way. And even if that means that you hate the Baron, then the game did its job because you're emotionally invested in him now as a character. You hate him, and therefore, in a way, you care about him. So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of gray areas in this quest, and to me that is great. That's what I think is so great about this game, and what I said earlier with the world building, and with Geralt being a great medium through which to view this world. And the thing is, this isn't like a one-off situation. There are numerous quests with outcomes like these that are tangible based upon your actions and decisions in the world. The main quest line even has multiple endings, as do a lot of side quests, and your role in each one is interesting and important. And this, to me, the Baron is just an easy example that came to mind. And it also touches, this quest line also, to me, touches on another thing that I absolutely love about this game, and that is its mythology. So this game is largely based on Polish mythology and monsters, and things from old Polish folk tales and such, which to me means that I have little to no exposure to many of these monsters, which makes them so much cooler to me. You have your traditional werewolf and stuff like that, but you also have, drowners and water hags and Leshens and all these other things that you don't really get exposed to in a lot of more Western mythology and even more Greek mythology and stuff like that. It's a more unique thing that you're not used to seeing. And that makes things a lot more interesting to me because there's a lot more unknown and a lot more intrigue with it. And this also goes hand in hand with the combat section I was talking about earlier about monsters' strength and weaknesses, because there's a little mythology behind each one as to why they are that way. But for me, it's much more important than just that you see it in the combat, because you also see it in the world building and in the lore. It goes deeper than just, oh, I should use fire on this thing because it's a water hag. Needless to say, there's some badass monster designs in this game that absolutely took me by surprise and are super, super interesting to me. They have different little quirks and things about them that are just really cool, and they're not your typical mainstream big monsters that you would see, at least in the United States, to me. Now, some of you may be more experienced with a lot of these things than I was when I played it, and maybe it'll be different for you. But I feel like for me and for most of Western society, it's a lot different, a lot more unique situation with their mythology. And it just makes the world seem so much more alien and interesting to me because it's so unlike everything else that I've seen in a lot of other similar type genres. And yet at the same time, I feel so invested in like this game, like I'm a part of the world. And it's just a super interesting thing that they can make this world feel so unfamiliar to me with this mythology, while at the same time making me feel like I'm such a deep and integral part of it. Another thing that I find incredible with this game is that this was CDPR's first ever open world game, and they absolutely nailed it. I mean, exploration is rewarded with you finding caches of loot and even the occasional rare or unique items. There's a lot of quests to be found from just wandering about the world, and usually they're quite intriguing. And, for a company with no experience in this market, they not only nailed the exploration of that aspect of the game, but also the badass loot that you can get. You can get these cool legendary items and this unique Witcher gear from different schools of the Witcher. The school of the bear that's a little heavier versus the school of the viper that's more focused on being light and quick on your feet. And those can all be upgraded. And I don't know, it even heightens the exploration side of the game even more when you know that there's really cool loot that you can find from doing it. And another awesome open world aspect is like the diversity of cultures across this game that you get to experience. And that's kind of weird to say about a video game, but it's so true here. So you go from things like the pompous Nilfgaardian Empire, who are, holier than thou, and, Geralt has to go through this really weird shaving thing and he has to, like, dress up all fancy, and it's just so not him, but you have to interact with the Nilfgaardians because they're just so proper and rich and elegant. And then you have like the religious lunatics of the Eternal Fire who burn witches and persecute people if they don't believe these exact religious tenets, and they sort of fearmonger through the streets. And then you have this super badass Viking-esque Skelligers, who are my favorite personally. I mean, they have little werebears and super interesting, like a pirate type Viking culture, and it's a super stark contrast to the mainland. And the interactions here are incredible because you come to Skellige after a little while in the game on the mainland and seeing some cities and stuff on the mainland of the game. And then you go to Skellige and you feel like a foreigner there. And it's just this stark contrast. And there has this super interesting and cool culture, and that you can see these customs reflected in them. And The landscape looks awesome, and just you can feel cultural interactions there. And when you see them interact with other people, not just yourself, other people from other cultures, you can almost feel this sort of tension versus, interacting with somebody that's considered one of their own. And you get the same thing in Nilfgaard. You feel like this lowly, brutish commoner when you're in the high courts of Nilfgaard. And I don't know, it's the way that CDPR created such diverse and unique cultures that could honestly form standalone stories in video games just about them is absolutely incredible to me. And it really goes a long way to investing you and immersing you into the game. Oh, and did I mention the graphics? Man, they are beautiful. You see the wind blowing through the grass and the trees, and it just looks awesome. And there's lush environments everywhere. And you have this rich, deep water that you see, and the water's like a slightly different color. In some of the biggest cities on the mainland versus in Skellige, it's a little more like darker and seawater type, and the environments change depending on where you are in the world, similar to how they would in real life. And you have these bustling cities that, I don't know, you see the poverty and the beggars interacting at the same time with these rich merchants and stuff like that. And these graphics make it look so great, and it helps it come to life even more. So I had to be sure to mention them. I'm not the biggest graphics person in the world, but at the time in 2015 on my PS4, this was great. Seeing these graphics, I was absolutely blown away. And one last quick point about the open world. There are damn near 0 loading screens in this game, and that is really impressive with the size and depth of this game. So a huge shout out to CD Projekt Red for that. And I mean, the last major thing, which I've yet to touch on for The Witcher, is CD Projekt Red themselves. When they released this game, they were a relatively small AAA gaming company who absolutely loved and adored their fans, and they wanted, above all else, to make an amazing game for them, and it shows. They aren't focused on making profits and adding in microtransactions to maximize their money, etc. They're focused on solely creating an outstanding game, and they did just that. They released loads of free DLC for the game that were small, and then when they did release the paid DLCs, they were massive additions to the game that were really, really compelling bits of story. Especially the Blood and Wine DLC. It is so damn good. You absolutely have to play it if you haven't. Honestly, it might be my favorite part of this game. Anyway, all that just goes to show that they valued the customer, because they weren't going to charge money for small updates to the game like horse armors. They're not going to make you pay $5 to get blue horse armor or something. And if they did ask you for money for DLC, you better believe it was going to be worth it with massive expansions that changed the game in huge ways. And this culture that they built there and the unity with their fan base, it was a beautiful thing to see. Similar to how Bethesda was with Skyrim, and you can see my Skyrim analysis for more on that, but it was a perfect example of what gaming should be to me. Unfortunately, that can no longer be said at CD Projekt Red, and it's not that they don't value their fans or their customers anymore, but you can see it's not what drives them as a company overall anymore the same way that it used to. This is evident with the Cyberpunk debacle that they've recently gone through, and I hate to see it happen that way because it seems to be such a common trend. All these great franchises and companies, they make a great game, they start for all the right reasons, and then they get immense success from that, and then they fall victim to the same poor practices that everybody else does with microtransactions and getting lazy and rushing a game out and just trying to make money. And it leads to fans feeling betrayed and, honestly, a much worse product and video game at the end of the day. Which takes me into the bad aspects of the game, and honestly, there were only 2 I could even think of, and they're super small. The first is that because you play as Geralt in this incredibly well-built world, there are some rules for you that, like, you can't just massacre innocents because it would be too out of character for him, and it would hurt his reputation as a Witcher, and you can't do that. You can't, completely break his character, and you lose a little bit of replayability and roleplay because you can't create your own character to connect with in the game. However, that's not really the intention of this game. I mean, I feel like it's a super small drawback for all the rewards you get from being Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf, the Butcher of Blaviken, I mean, you get so many benefits for having this well-built existing world to play in, that to me, it's very much so worth not being able to make your own character. And then the other complaint if you can even really call it that, is that personally I'm just not a fan of leveled items in video games. Meaning, like, if I unlock or acquire this like legendary silver sword, and then I realize I can't use it until I'm level 18 or something like that, and I'm only like level 14, it just sits in my inventory and becomes a lot less cool to me because I'm just looking at it, but I can't use it. To me, that's just a personal preference, though. It's kind of a nitpick, and they did it to balance the game, and I understand why they did that to balance the game. It's just personally, I'm not a fan of using that system in gaming to balance your game. But again, tiny little nitpick, and that's really all the bad things I could think of. So with all that being said, the future of The Witcher is unclear. As a gaming franchise, it may be done for good, with The Witcher 3 supposedly being like a finale of sorts for the series. But there are some rumors floating around with potential sequels or even prequels I've heard about sometimes with Geralt being your main character. Some things even say that you're going to get to play as Ciri as a main character in the next games, which would be super cool, but I don't know how they would balance it. But honestly, nobody knows anything about the series as a whole. We don't know if there's anything coming. If there's not, it's all kind of up in the air. All I know is that as long as CD Projekt Red doesn't try to turn this game into a cheap cash cow, I'm good either way. If that was the finale, then that was the finale. If there's more Witcher content to play, then I'm absolutely down to play it. You know, I'm good either way. Now, as far as the TV series goes, Season 2 releases soon, and I'm pretty sure that there's going to be even more to follow that. And then there's word that those could even lead to some other spin-offs in the same universe as The Witcher. So if you're a fan of the TV series, it seems likely that there's going to be content in there for you to enjoy for quite a while because it's been super popular so far. Anyway, I think I've gone on long enough about my opinions on this game. Now it's time for a final rating, and I'm going to have to give it a 10 out of 10. I mean, there are simply very few flaws and so many great things about this game that to me make it a defining game of its generation, and honestly of generations to come. It is a game that I will compare all future games in its genre to, and therefore it is a full perfect 10 out of 10 for me.